Hi everybody, welcome to the Property Podcast. I'm Rob B, of course with Rob D, and you're listening to episode 246. Now, we all know that the North is far superior. End of podcast. Was it too much, Rob?
Well, let's extend the episode a little bit. I think people are tuning in expecting a bit more than 30 seconds. So just for the sake of getting a bit of a longer show out, let's continue the North-South debate a little bit. This is inspired by a recent episode of Dispatches on Channel 4 called Is Britain Full? It was looking at the divide between London and the South East and what's happening in places like Liverpool and Manchester. It was a really interesting show. It's going to be relevant to anyone who's invested in the North or is thinking of doing so. So we're going to go through that episode, share our thoughts and talk about what it means for you from a property perspective.
So the news story's coming up, which of course we're going to talk about the budget, plenty to discuss there. And we've got our resource of the week, which with all the changes in the budget, you are definitely going to need. But before that, Rob, it's our last meetup of the year coming up. I feel a bit sad.
Yep, it is, but no need to be sad because they're going to be back again next year and they're going to be better than ever. But to make sure you do get along to the final meetup of 2017, God, that's gone quickly, you just need to get over to thepropertyhub.net/meetups and claim your place. If you've been procrastinating, you haven't been along to a meetup yet, or if you've been to a few this year but you're not a regular, sometimes you get a bit busy, go to this one. Make sure you're going into Christmas when it's that really important kind of planning and setting yourself up for next year period. Make sure you're going into that with lots of motivation and as much information as you can.
And top tip, if you're looking for a meetup to go to, Chris, the meetup leader in St Albans, often provides mince pies in the December meetup. I'm sure it's been completely random that the last 2 Christmases I've been there. I can't make it this year, but if you like a mince pie and great company, of course, then check out the St Albans meetup.
All right, and of course you are already staying informed about property by listening to this podcast, but now even more people can because the podcast is now on Spotify. So if it's easier for you to listen that way, you can do. Just go and type in Property Podcast into Spotify. Or if you've got friends who could benefit from the knowledge that we're sharing, but they don't really understand what podcasts are, you've tried to get them into iTunes, it's not quite working, but they're Spotify users, tell them. Just get them to go and find us over there and we can share the knowledge further.
Okay, so news story of the week. Of course, it has to be the budget. Plenty happened, Rob, but landlords didn't get smashed up, which was quite a relief, but plenty to talk about on the property front. The biggest news story for me has to be the abolished stamp duty for first-time buyers purchasing properties up to £300,000. So if you're a first-time buyer and your property is less than £300,000, then congratulations, you'll have no stamp duty to pay. And it goes further. If you're buying a property in a more expensive area as a first-time buyer and the price is up to £500, you still get the first £300 stamp duty waived. So that's going to be a really positive change for anybody looking to get on the property ladder. The thing about the property ladder is once you're on it, it's hard to fall off. You're pretty much on it for life. But getting on for most people is the hard part. So this is a step in the right direction.
Yep, and that applies everywhere except Scotland. It remains to be seen whether the Scottish Government decides to do that because it's devolved up there. Also, some big numbers being thrown around as always. 44 billion is this budget's big number. That's how much they're going to be allocating to housing overall to meet their target of building 300,000 new homes a year by the middle of the next decade. Excuse me if I don't get too excited about that because we hear a lot of big numbers and a lot of promises around housing that tend not to happen.
300,000 new homes. As somebody tweeted me this week, Liverpool and their shaky defence have got more chance of keeping clean sheets for the rest of the season than this happening. And that person is right. Neither of those things are going to happen. Liverpool will concede many more goals because the defence is rubbish. And the government will not even get close to this 300,000. As many of you would have heard us talk about the Barker report, which came out over 10 years ago now, which was a government report, said that we need to build 250,000 new homes each year to keep up with demand. We've not hit that target once since the report came out. So the ambitious target of 300,000 a year, I think they've got no chance. But it's nice to have ambition.
Yep, and just a couple of other quick highlights. They're looking into compulsory purchase of land banks that are held by developers for financial reasons. That's just a consultation. Remains to be seen if they end up doing anything with that or if that is even a thing. Got my doubts. And they're also looking into delays between planning permission being granted and construction of a development starting. So that's something else they're going to be looking into, and we may hear more about, or it may turn out just to be a headline. We will see. So stamp duty is the big one. There's a few smaller ones in there, but the main thing is nothing targeting landlords.
Hurrah! So we've escaped this budget with no more pain. I think we can take that as a positive. And the stamp duty changes, while not radical enough for us, are a step in the right direction. So overall, not a bad budget.
Okay, so for our main topic this week, we're looking into the North-South divide. As I said at the top of the show, this is inspired by an episode of Dispatches on Channel 4 called Is Britain Full? And in the show notes, we will link that up. So if you want to go and watch the full show on Channel 4 Catch-Up, you can do. So we're going to look at what this means. But before we do that, we need to understand exactly what the situation is. So to start with, here's what the show had to say about what the problem in the north currently is.
Our estimates reveal that in the north of England and Scotland, the three largest cities have actually decreased in size over a 95-year period. Manchester by about 25%, and Liverpool just under 40%, and Glasgow by just over 40%. Across these three cities, almost 1 million people have left.
Okay, so the population of some of the North's biggest cities has fallen radically, yet the population of the country as a whole has gone up. So, mystery here. Where's everyone gone?
While Liverpool shrank over 95 years, London exploded by 1.4 million. And we discover our population imbalance could get worse. By 2039, Liverpool is forecast to grow by just over 42,000. That's a drop in the ocean compared to the almost 2.2 million expected in London, which could have 11 million people by then.
Okay, so we're starting to piece this together now, but let's dig into the detail. Let's listen to a student, and they sound like they're from my neck of the woods, talking about her future and where she's going to live.
I don't think in 3 years' time I'll be in Liverpool. In my heart of hearts, I don't particularly want to go to London. I mean, I will go wherever the job is. There isn't the infrastructure in place and there isn't the opportunities that there are down south, so why not go somewhere where you're going to be given the opportunities to develop yourself in a multinational firm.
So she's not alone. 25% of people who are currently students will end up working in London. So obviously London is drawing people in. Young people who are getting qualified, they're looking for the first job to build their career. They're not doing that in the places they're studying. If they're from the north, they're not staying there. If they're studying in the north, obviously loads of massive, very successful universities in the north, but they're not staying there. They're all coming to London. London is where loads of stuff is going on. It's where all the companies are. It's where most of the jobs are. Why is that? In short, it's something called agglomeration effect, which you might not have heard of before, but you probably have heard of economies of scale. Basically, the more of something you've got, the cheaper it becomes. This is like the sort of macro population version of the same thing. When you've got a big city, everything's closer together. Therefore, there are lots of businesses in the same industry who can trade with each other more easily. Everything's closer together, so there's smaller distances to transport goods. And also, from a population point of view, people like to live where there's lots of things going on, where there's lots of employment options, lots of leisure options, lots of different types of people who they can interact with. So the bigger a place gets up to a certain point, the more attractive it is for individuals and the more attractive it is for businesses. So this is almost like a vicious cycle. London has got more and more popular over the last 100 years. Therefore, there's more and more there. Therefore, more and more people come, and that is to London's benefit, population-wise at least, and the migration from northern cities just continues faster and faster because there's ever less going on there and ever more going on in London.
So all this sounds pretty awful, or you could say pretty grim. So what can we do about it? What can the government do about it? What needs to happen?
So the Dispatches programme spoke to different people and came up with a few different suggestions for things that could be done to improve the situation. Now, one of those suggestions was immigration. sounds weird because we've had this whole debate and a lot of people in the country seem to think that there's too much immigration. But that immigration, largely speaking, is going to London. So one suggestion is local visas. So you can come and work in the UK, but that visa is tied to a specific geographical reason. That's one suggestion that was in there. Another suggestion was incentives to keep graduates local. So we already talked about the fact that when people graduate, 25% of them will end up moving away and living in London. So incentives and apprenticeships done locally to keep graduates local and stop them from moving, which I think would make a big difference because that's people building their careers there. If the graduate's there, then I think the jobs will go there as well. And you'll have companies basing themselves not just in London. So that's a couple of suggestions, but the really big one, Rob, I think, is around transport. That's such a big issue.
For me, those two could make a nice difference, but it's transport that's the game changer. It really is. There's two clips for you now. This first one really highlights the problem. This is somebody speaking from Liverpool Waters, Peel Ports. Liverpool Waters is a huge investment going into Liverpool, and the recently upgraded docks there are now taking in state-of-the-art cargo, something they've been unable to do for decades. But listen to what they're up against.
What are the barriers to success now for you that are outside your control?
Okay, well, I guess the answer to that is connectivity. So, we've recently built a facility here that serves a customer in West Yorkshire. That journey time for freight today can take 10 hours.
10 hours from Liverpool to Yorkshire?
10 hours from here to Yorkshire, yeah. That's for freight, of course. So that is not conducive to good business.
But it doesn't have to be that way. It sounds pretty shocking, and it is. It doesn't have to be that way. Listen to Lord O'Neill now talk about the simple solution to most of the problems we've talked about.
40 miles either side of Manchester, you have Liverpool, Leeds, Sheffield, and all those towns and some cities between them. If you can do stuff to connect all those people together, both as producers and consumers, hey, presto, easy.
Just like that.
Just like that.
And that's the thing. HS2 is a great start because it means that the north becomes commuter distance to London. But it shouldn't be, let's just make everything quicker to London. Let's make the north the powerhouse that it needs to be. HS3 has to happen. HS2 will make a super positive difference, but HS3 has to happen. For the reasons, Rob, you were talking about before, about how it's benefited London.
Yeah, exactly. The whole agglomeration effects I was talking about. London has lots of things going on, therefore more things start going on, and that cycle continues. There's no reason why you shouldn't have that in the north as well, because you've got a few, at least 3 or 4 major population centres that are really close to each other, but they're just not joined up. If you link them up so it was easy and quick to travel between them, then you've basically got then one massive population centre which would have all the benefits that London currently enjoys, and therefore more and more people would come, which means that there's more going on, there's more employment, it's easier to make and sell things, and that cycle would benefit the north. At the moment, because they're so disjointed, individually they just can't compete with the power and the draw of London, but together they could, and transport is the way to make that happen. At the moment, unfortunately, though, the government doesn't seem to have got the message about this. There's a lot of spending going on transport, but it's not necessarily going where it should.
The amount the government has spent on transport in the north compared to London remains vastly different. In 2015, £376 per person was spent in the north, while in London it was almost £1,000. And from 2016, it's predicted that spending in the north will be £427, compared with almost £2,000 per person in London.
Amazing stats there. The government talks about the Northern Powerhouse and investments in the north, but they really need to do better. They're starting from such a low base that they just have to improve. For example, the Trans-Pennine route is terrible. They've scrapped plans to electrify that line, but they've found £30 billion to allocate to Crossrail too. Now, that's probably needed as well. I'm not London bashing, I live in the south. But 30 billion, and then you can't build HS3. HS3 needs to come first before building another Crossrail, or build both. But the difference is shocking, and I'm not the only one who's angry. Listen to what Andy Burnham's got to say.
We've seen an agenda for a meeting at the Transport Ministry which talks about future investment in the railways as being unsustainable. You know, there's worries about that. Does that worry you?
Yes, it does worry me. And I don't think the Department for Transport are behind us. They never really have been in the north of England. And the real problem is, in our country, with a centralised political system on Westminster, the London view of life dominates. It dominates all the decisions. It's about time we got our fair share.
Okay, so it's about time the North got its fair share, according to Andy Burnham. We agree, by the sounds of what we've talked about. But will it? That is really the big question as we come into talking about what it means for property. Because we hear this all the time when we're talking to people who are from the south, but they've been effectively priced out or they can't get the returns they want. They look to invest in the north and they're asking, like, is there tenant demand in the north? And yeah, of course there is. There are millions of people who live in the north. There are jobs. There are small pockets that are basically completely empty, but you can, of course, invest very well in the north. But there's still this kind of sneaking suspicion that London gets all the attention. London's where the growth is going to be and where there's more potential. However, for investment reasons, that means that there's loads more upside in the north. It's already a place that we are investing in, that we've been talking about a lot, that's growing very nicely in terms of property prices and that a lot of people are catching on to. But there's still absolutely tons of upside. But London is massive, but it's already really expensive. Everything's already priced in. In the north, it's already doing quite well. But if you believe that the political will is going to be there to encourage business and encourage infrastructure, it hasn't been so far, but it's been talked about more and more over the last few years. If you think that that's actually going to come to something and the political will is there, then there's even more upside in the north. So in terms of investment, you'd think, well, if you're putting your money up there rather than in the south, you're going to get better returns straight away and you could have stronger growth. Because there are signs, Rob, that things are turning around.
Yeah, take Manchester as a case point. It's bouncing. Manchester is really, I'd describe to many people who don't know the North well, it's like the London of the North. The economy is doing very well. Property prices are doing very well. Investments, they are doing great at attracting investment. Multiple billion-pound projects going in there. Businesses relocating from London to Manchester. BBC, for example. There's loads and loads going on in Manchester. Now, Manchester's one place in the north. It is not the north. So Manchester's a great example of what can be done if you get it right. But other areas in the north need to take note. And the government needs to help other areas do well. Otherwise, Manchester will just become the London of the north and absorb everybody like London has in the southeast. The same things will play out if they don't do the things we've talked about.
So there is a lot going on. There is a lot of opportunity. But a point that became really apparent from watching this program was how important it is to get the location right, because there are so many areas that are still deprived or where the population has massively decreased and nothing's been done about it yet. There was a clip where they were showing whole streets of boarded up houses in Liverpool, and that didn't shock me because I've been there, I've seen it for myself, but I was watching it with my wife and she couldn't believe that there are whole streets, almost entire areas where there's just nobody living there. And I think most people don't realise that that actually is the case. Now, obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to be smarter than to go and buy a house slap bang in the middle of a street that's completely empty. But that's just an extreme example. There are plenty of areas where if you're not careful, you could go and go, oh, that looks cheap. I'm going to go and buy there. The return must be massive. And then find that it's not quite what you thought it was. So be careful. Even when we say Manchester, Manchester is a big place. There are areas that you would want to invest. There are areas where you definitely wouldn't want to invest, and a lot in between. So you've got to pick your area carefully.
The good news is things are turning around as they are already. As Rob said, it started from a low base point. Really, from 2000 onwards, the investment in the north has been happening. It was neglected for decades before then. And the populations of all these places have been growing since then as well. So it's reversing that trend. But more needs to be done. Manchester's a great example of what can be done. A real shining light for the north. And God, this really hurts as a Scouser to say so many nice things about Manchester. But it really is a great example of what can be done if you invest money into an area. Investment's so important, so make sure you listen at the end to find out what next week's podcast is about, because you really need to listen to that one as a follow-on from this episode. But Manchester, great example of what can be done if you get it right. The rest of the north, yes, it's improving, and yes, there's investment there, but more. HS2, great. That improves things massively. A game changer, you could say. But HS3, well, people wouldn't even need to bother going to London if they built HS3. So fingers crossed that happens and we have a more balanced country. Prime example to kind of sign off on this point is look at Germany. Germany doesn't have one dominant city because the transport links are so good and the investment is so balanced that Germany has really strong cities across the country. And that's why Germany economically, one of the many reasons they're so strong, because they've got a really well-balanced economy across the whole country. Germany shows how it can be done, where we can get to. Now, you may have your biases, but Germany does, on an economic level, consistently outperform the UK. So we can definitely learn from them. Review of the week time. And yes, we've got another one because we've got so many lovely listeners. And this week we've got Andy, who's left us a review. Absolutely essential, and in brackets, and free resource of information for property investors. No matter what your experience is, property guru or complete newbie, you'll definitely find a whole heap of great advice here. It's presented in a fun, no-nonsense way, and every episode has some great tips. Absolutely recommended. Keep up the good work, Rob and Rob. Well, thank you, Andy. Thank you for your review.
Right, we promised you a resource of the week, and we always deliver. This week we were talking about the budget, and the BBC has got a really good budget calculator so you can find out how the budget will affect you. We've already given you the big news, which is thankfully, as a property investor, it won't affect you as much as past budgets have. So more into the realms of beer and wine, income tax and all that sort of thing. So broadly, a budget that's ignored us as property investors, and I think ignoring is something that we will happily take at this stage. But if you want to find out the details of how you're financially affected, you can find the budget calculator on the BBC website, and we'll be linking that up along with everything else we've talked about today at thepropertyhub.net/north-south.
Well, next week's episode, we continue that theme because we're looking at major investment and regeneration projects across the country, north and south. We're looking at where's the money going, because sometimes, and you'll learn this next week, sometimes investment isn't all that it seems and won't have the impact that you think. And sometimes it makes a huge difference. So make sure you join us next week for that one. And of course, we'll be back on Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob. So make sure you don't miss that one. And it's even easier now not to miss us because we're on Spotify. So make sure you spread the word on that one. We'll love you just that little bit more. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.